Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream Corporation taking a controversial stance in the Middle East and deciding to discontinue its franchise agreements with Israel. Meanwhile, newly sworn-in Knesset member / accessibility advocate Shirley Pinto making her first big splash in government policy. And finally, a look at the legacy and future of Omri Caspi, the 33-year-old Israeli basketballer announcing intentions on Sunday to retire from the NBA. Starting early Tuesday morning, 2 rockets fired at northern Israel from Lebanon, and the pair setting off warning sirens in the western Galilee region. Breaking from expectations, however, the Israeli military believing that this was not the work of Iranian proxy terror group Hezbollah. Rather, experts are pointing to a Palestinian group in southern Lebanon, which is also alleged to have fired a dozen rockets into Israel in May during Israel's Operation Guardian of the Walls. Also, thankfully, Israel's Iron Dome defense system intercepting one of the rockets while allowing the second to strike an open area near the coast. Israel reporting no injuries or damages. The IDF also responding to the attack with tank shellings towards the estimated launch site in the Wadi Harmul Valley. Meanwhile, late on Monday night, Syrian state media similarly accusing Israel of launching a number of missiles towards the city of Aleppo, though the target was not yet clear, and no injuries have been reported. The IDF, for its part, isn't commenting on the alleged attack either, as per policy. In other news, Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream, no stranger to involvement in social justice issues, is now taking a hard stance on the Israel-Palestinian conflict. The dessert dealer announcing that it will not be renewing its licensing agreement with its Israeli franchisee in protest against the franchisee's continued sale to the occupied territories and settlements.
I refuse it. Number one, legally in Israel, you cannot stop selling or decide not to sell to a customer. It doesn't matter if the customer is in Tel Aviv or in Haifa. So legally I cannot do it. And as an Israeli, and as a manufacturer and company that lives here, there's no way I can say no to Israeli citizens. So when they realize that there's no way that I will stop it, they decided not to renew my contract.
Ben & Jerry's does plan to continue to sell to Israel proper, however, just under a different agreement that is yet to be determined. In any case, in the meantime, the decision is setting off a firestorm of conflict. Dozens of groceries, markets, and customers worldwide joining in a retaliatory boycott of the brand. And joining me now with more is in the studio, author and executive director of Stand With Us Israel, Michael Dixon. Then on Zoom, we also have economic consumer behavior expert and assistant professor Billy Abraham. Thank you both so much for joining us. Now, Michael, I'm going to start with you. Were you surprised by this? Where did you see this coming from?
I wasn't surprised. I was disappointed. There was massive pressure placed on Ben & Jerry's for a number of years. And unfortunately, what they've done is acquiesce to that pressure. And so within hours of the announcement being made, we saw 10,000 people join our Stand With Us campaign to write letters through our website to the CEO of Unilever, the parent company of Ben & Jerry's, and to Ben & Jerry's and to their top executives to tell them to rescind this discriminatory policy.
What do you think your chances are?
I think they're great because we saw this play out before. We saw massive pressure placed on Airbnb, and they, in the end, rescinded their policy. And part of that is because BDS destroys a company's reputation. BDS is an inherently anti-Semitic campaign. And of course, the idea that by withdrawing the sale to some Jewish communities of chubby hubby and fish food is somehow going to pursue the cause of Middle East peace is ridiculous. But at the same time, what it is discriminatory. So of course, the Israeli licensee couldn't practice that discrimination, as you heard him say. And of course, for them to ask so was completely wrong-headed.
All right, now, Vili, I want to turn to you. What do you think that this decision's effect will be on Israel's economy, assuming that it will go forward, and especially about the effect on Israeli and Palestinian workers who work with Ben & Jerry's?
Well, if you look at Ben & Jerry's Israel, which is located in the south of the country, it employs mostly if not all Israelis, according to data that I was able to find, about 160. But it will affect those Israelis. However, one major retailer has announced today on the radio that he's willing to help the local manufacturer, Ben & Jerry Israel, to produce a local brand and distribute it instead of Ben & Jerry, meaning it's a way to save those jobs of the 160 workers. As far as the economy is concerned, it's really hard to assess, but Ben & Jerry does hold a big share of the ice cream market in Israel. It's about 49%. However, I think that there are many alternatives to Ben & Jerry should this decision come into effect.
All right, so Michael, I want to come back to you now. Boycott Ben & Jerry's. It's trending on Twitter. It's all over the place, and as you mentioned, there's been a fierce response. However, it's interesting because this boycott is now coming actually from both sides. You have pro-Israelis boycotting over the decision to kill the license, and then you have the pro-BDSers who are boycotting the brand because of Unilever's promise to continue selling to Israel, but under a different agreement. Is Ben & Jerry's basically screwed?
Well, by this,
damned if they do, damned if they don't?
They are, because by this virtual signaling act, they've acquiesced to a campaign that is relentless. And
but now it seems that they've backed themselves into a corner, because if they reverse course...
Well, they potentially have. They've done themselves some reputational damage. And also they've opened themselves up legally and financially. You know, in over 35 states in America, they've passed anti-BDS legislation. And I would say in nearly all of those states, they have pension funds that are invested in Unilever. Now that's going to open them up because the states may decide, and I hope will decide, they actually don't want to invest in a company that practices discrimination. So this is going to cause them significant problem. Now, what you've said is instructive because what it shows you is BDS's true aim. They're not satisfied with any kind of gesture from Ben & Jerry's. They want the whole thing, the whole carton of ice cream. They want the destruction of the state of Israel. And Omar Barghouti, who's the head of the BDS campaign, who I've debated, has said that openly in his own words. So by giving them an inch, they just want a mile. And what they want is the destruction of the world's only Jewish country, and that's unacceptable.
All right, now we're going to come back to the topic of a potential lawsuit. But Vili, I want to turn back to you because something that's very interesting is that Unilever reportedly went over Ben & Jerry's head by adding that little statement about continuing to sell in the territory or in Israel, whereas Ben & Jerry's board apparently wanted to just cut it and not sell in Israel at all. Are we going to see some internal strife between Unilever and Ben & Jerry's that could even hurt Ben & Jerry's much further than any sort of boycott?
Well, that's a possibility. I think that overall Unilever can pressure Ben & Jerry to change, overturn its decision not to sell in Israel or Israeli, what they call occupied territories. But I think if you look at Ben & Jerry, I don't think it's going to be affected a lot as far as sales are concerned. But as we just heard, I think that as far as the image is concerned, it could be really, really detrimental because, as you said, there are boycotts or potential boycotts from both sides of the conflict.
Well, and there are also, dozens of different markets and grocery stores all over the world that we've been seeing posting about how they're going to stop holding Ben & Jerry's on their shelves. You don't think that that's really going to dip into their pockets, or?
No, on a global scale, definitely, because if you just look at the sales in the U.S., Ben & Jerry's is the leading ice cream brand. Sales in 2020 amounted to almost $900 million, and on a global scale, it's billions of dollars. So definitely a big potential damage. But in Israel, the market is relatively small, so it'll take a smaller bite as a result of the act.
All right, now let's talk a little bit more about how this might play in court. We know that Finance Minister Yair Lapid actually referred to how he might pursue action. Let's take a look.
ההחלטה של בן & ג'ריז היא כניעה מבישה לאנטישמיות, ל-BDS, לכל מה שרע בשיח האנטי-ישראלי והאנטי-יהודי, ואנחנו לא נשתוק להם. ביותר מ-30 מדינות בארצות הברית, יש חוקים נגד כניעה ל-BDS שעברו בשנים האחרונות. אני מתכונן ללכת אחת ולדרוש מהן להפעיל את החוקים האלה נגד בן אנד ג'ריז, מפני שהם לא התייחסו אלינו בצורה כזו.
All right, now, Michael, how might this actually play out in court? Assuming Lapid makes good on this threat, what kinds of damages could be exacted from Ben & Jerry's?
Well, you're seeing the action already play out, and you've seen ambassadors to the United States and the United Nations, Gilad Erdan, send out letters now to governors of states all across the United States, asking them to take action if they've passed anti-BDS legislation to enact it, and to potentially put forward steps to withdraw their pension funds and other investments in Unilever, the parent company of Ben & Jerry's. It could cause them significant aggravation, as it should. They don't want anything to do with investing their state funds in discrimination, and this is purely discrimination. People should understand that when people say the West Bank, they mean the old city of Jerusalem. They mean the Western Wall. There are areas where Jews will not be sold to, according to this new policy by Ben & Jerry's. They have to rescind that or face significant action to them and to their parent company.
All right. Michael Dixon, Billy Abraham, thank you both so much for being with me today.
Pleasure.
Moving on, in honor of Eid al-Adha, the three-day Muslim holiday celebrating Abraham's sacrificing of the lamb, Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz calling Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas to wish him a happy holiday and to discuss the improving of Israeli-Palestinian relations. Hannah Rifkin with the story.
A historic phone call described as having a, quote, positive atmosphere. Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz holding the first conversation in over 4 years between a high-ranking Israeli minister and the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas. The last such conversation taking place in 2017 between Abbas and former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Gantz calling particularly to wish a happy holiday to the PA president ahead of Eid al-Adha. Likewise, President Isaac Herzog placing a similar call to Abbas, conveying his own blessings and well wishes ahead of the festival. The two had last spoken weeks earlier when Abbas had called Herzog to congratulate him on his newly elected presidency. The leaders apparently expressing interest to maintain regular contact between one another going into the future. Then at Israel's weekly cabinet meeting, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett extending his good wishes to all Muslims in Israel and the region.
אזרחי ישראל המוסלמים והדרוזים, בשם ממשלת ישראל, אני מבקש לברך אתכם לרגל חג הקורבן, עיד אל-אדחא, שיחול מחר. אני מבקש בשם ממשלת ישראל לאחל חג שמח גם לאזרחי מדינות האזור, שכנינו, ובראשן מצרים, ירדן, האמירויות שפתחו בשבוע שעבר את השגרירות בישראל, בחריין שתשלח בקרוב שגריר לארץ, מרוקו וסודן. אני מאחל לכולם חג שמח.
In other news, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett walking back his words following vows to, quote, maintain the rights of worship for all at the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. But contrary to earlier reports that Bennett simply misspoke, new reports are alleging that it was actually Foreign Minister and alternate Prime Minister Yair Lapid who pressured Bennett to reverse his course. Here to break down what this means is political analyst Orly Rappaport. Orly, thank you so much for joining us. Now, what does Bennett's change in statement really mean? What could have happened had he not revoked his words?
So let's start with the fact that people are actually praying, or I guess praying is the right word, when they go up to Temple Mount, have been doing it for the past 6 months and nobody spoke about it. Tisha B'Av, that we just celebrated, fasted though, and mentioned, people went up to Temple Mount and sang Hatikva, as we saw a member of the Knesset, Amichai Shikli, standing by Shuli Mualem, singing Hatikva. They were not actually trying to provocate. Turns out, Amichai Shikli said in an interview, people took the video without him even noticing. I think that Bennett saw it as an opportunity to try to normalize the fact that people are praying there and just put it in between the lines. But it brought a different kind of response. He did what he had to do right now, and sitting with Mansour Abbas in the same government, he had no choice but to say that. It doesn't mean that people will necessarily stop praying there. It doesn't mean that the orders to the police are the same as what they say, as what the government says, because we know that saying one thing, doing another thing is very common in many places, not only in Israel.
What does this incident, however, also say perhaps about the power-sharing agreement and the relationship shared between Prime Minister Bennett and alternate Prime Minister Yair Lapid?
It means that they have a very good one. It means that when one person does or says something that the other one does not agree with, they see how to fix and protect each other. I think it's a good cooperation happening between them internally within this government. They both want it to work. When one person says one thing, the other person is there to back him up or to tell him, listen, this is unacceptable right now, and help him come out of it the best way possible. We saw, for example, Yair Lapid, Minister of Foreign Affairs, in his anti-Semitism speech that he gave that was very, very, very bad, if you ask many people in Israel. And you did not see Naftali Bennett attack him for it, even though past times, if it would have happened a year, 2 years ago, he would have. So you see there's a good cooperation between the two. They wanted to succeed and they do whatever they can to protect each other.
So you don't think that this is any sort of situation that could be characterized as Lapid maybe flexing or trying to show his power or the extent to which he can maybe change things up and assert himself?
No, I don't think that's the case. Not between Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid. Between the two, as we spoke in the past, you and I, about the cooperation that has been between them since 2013. We can see pictures of this brotherhood thing since 2013 that both wanted to work. They're not going against each other. They're going together to protect each other. For them, it's a process, learning how to work together. But none of them, neither of them is trying to hurt the other one.
All right, Orly Rapoport, thank you so much for your insights. All right, now in light of the pandemic's continuing spread, new coronavirus regulations are coming out daily along with heavily weighted warnings begging for compliance from the public. But too many, it seems, are ignoring the calls.
מגפת הדלתא ממשיכה להתפשט במהירות ברחבי העולם. זאת מוטציה מדבקת הרבה יותר מקודמותיה. העולם הולך ונצבע אדום.
Prime Minister Naftali Bennett again warning the public to get on board with new restrictions or else face dire consequences, both personally for violating new rules and publicly with respect to the health of the nation. Also, with the exception of a strong advisory to avoid international travel, Bennett is stressing that for the sake of protecting one another, the new rules are, quote, requirements, not recommendations, end quote. The rules are including limiting arrivals to events, weddings, bar mitzvahs, etc., to vaccinated individuals or to those who've recovered from the virus or have a recent negative test. The Revelry Pass, a new take on the Green Pass, likewise coming into effect. And then abiding by relevant quarantines and wearing masks indoors or in large crowds also stressed as a must. Bennett continuing that the goal is remaining to return to as close to normal as soon as possible, including with tourism and the coming school semester, especially after a full year of, quote, millions of pupils fading in front of Zoom at home, end quote.
אנחנו עכשיו נערכים מראש עם תוכנית סדורה לתקופה הקרובה עד לשנת הלימודים. בזמן הקרוב אנחנו נודיע על הכל באופן מסודר, בלי הנחתות של הדקה ה-90, כדי שיהיה לכולם זמן לתכנן ולהערך. המטרה המרכזית שלנו, לפתוח את שנת הלימודים בצורה חלקה.
The repeated pleas for compliance, however, still appearing to fall on deaf ears. Over 37,000 passengers passing through Ben Gurion International Airport on Monday alone, nearly double the number from the day before. Likewise, buses and trains overcrowding with people who are ignoring the mask mandate, leading many passengers to complain about the lack of potentially life-saving enforcement. In any case, despite authorities' best wishes, if adherence continues to flounder and infections continue to rise, new lockdowns in Israel may be on the horizon. In related news, newly rising star deaf Knesset member Shirley Pinto from the Yamina Party earning her first stripes in government this week. The career advocate for accessibility in Israel and Health Minister Nitzan Horowitz together announcing the introduction of transparent masks for hospital staff. And this just 1 week after Pinto delivering a blistering speech to Knesset on all of the accessibility shortfalls across the country, particularly with respect to healthcare. At any rate, hospitals and clinics in Israel will now soon be required to stock clear-faced masks so that staff and medical experts can abide by COVID regulations while better communicating with hearing impaired patients who rely on lip reading.
קודם כל אני רוצה להודות לו ולך על האישור, באמת תוך 3 ימים הוא אישר את המסכות השקופות בשימוש בבתי חולים. לפניו נאבקנו על זה מאוד מאוד קשה מול שר הבריאות הקודם. זה דבר מאוד פשוט והוא אישר את זה כל כך מהר על התקן האמריקאי. יש לנו את המסכה הזאת, מסכה שקופה, מסכה רפואית שנותנת שירות בבתי חולים וקופות חולים. אני רוצה להודות לך באמת על האישור הזריז בשם כל קהילת החירשים וכבדי שמיעה. תודה ענקית לך.
The directive is set to take effect August 1st. Now on to our final topic tonight, Omri Moshe Kaspi, the first Israeli drafted NBA player and certified stud, has officially decided to retire from the sport. This after 10 seasons in the NBA and another 2 playing for Maccabi Tel Aviv in his homeland of Israel. So here for a look back at the Holon native's career is vice editor for Yediot Achonot Sports, Yair Katan. Thank you so much for joining us, Yair.
My pleasure.
All right, so first of all, what do you say, what do you think about this announcement? Was it right? Was it the right time? Do you think that he could or should have stayed for a little while longer?
Well, it was to be expected. Many thought he might have done it a year ago because the lingering injuries really prevented him from being himself. You could see his court intelligence, his basketball smarts. The team played better when he was on because he knows how to direct his friends and move the ball to the right places. But his body couldn't keep up anymore. He had some devastating knee injuries during his time in the NBA. Later on in Israel, only this year, he suffered a major stomach virus that kept him out for a long time. It seemed that every time he was getting on, catching some momentum, his body caved. So eventually, it was the right decision. He had to do it because the mental toll of dealing with all those injuries was already big for him.
So looking back over his long career with the NBA, 10 plus years, what do you think his biggest strength was? And maybe if there's like a highlight, something that stands out in your mind.
I think that the major thing that can be said that nobody played him or chose him or signed him to a new contract because he was the first Israeli. It was because he was a good basketball player and he belonged there. He was a great team player. He made a lot of friends who afterwards came to Israel to visit that he planned so they can see the real Israel. He improved. He came into the league needing to improve his shot from outside and became a reliable three-point shooter. And in general, he did all those little things that connect all the other players. He wasn't a huge star, even though there was that one game in 2015 against Steph Curry when they went head-to-head with three-pointers and he finished with 36 points, which was amazing. He has one asterisk that a little bit sore, that is ranked fourth all-time in the number of regular season games without playing even one playoff game.
Oh, wow.
Something always eluded him, but you can sum it up as a great career.
All right, well, of course, now we have Danny Avdija, who is carrying on the legacy for Israelis in the NBA. We'll be sad to see Omri go, but very happy to see the stamp that he left on the NBA.
No doubt.
Yair, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And now let's take a look at the weather forecast with Chana Rifkin.
So, meteorologists calling for clear skies again, and very warm lows tonight, ranging throughout the country between 19 to 29 degrees Celsius. Then highs mostly in the 30s, ranging between 31 to 35 degrees, with raised temperatures in Eilat at 41 and slightly lower temperatures in Haifa at 28. And before we head back to the studio, I just want to wish our wonderful host, Aaron, happy birthday.
Thank you, Chana. All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.3 shekels to the American dollar and 2.59 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well. Thank you so much for watching.